Well, good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon and welcome. We're glad you're here, and thank you for being with us. We'll get rid of that hum in just a second. So my name is Stephen Fetter, and I said that I needed to start before we introduce the moderator or our panelists, because we have, at last count, 76 people online watching this, as well as everybody here in the room. We had about 150 registered, so they will probably continue to log on as we move along, and that's really exciting. I think this may be the first time that we have officially connected theological students from every school across Canada. I think that's a remarkable thing. So congratulations for being a part of that. Because we're doing it this way, if you ask a question, they will not hear you in Vancouver unless you use a mic. Doesn't matter how loud your voice is. So we have a couple of handheld wireless mics, and when we get to the Q&A, I'll invite you please to take a mic, and please stand so that I can focus a camera on you, and the people in New Brunswick can watch you too. So that way we'll try to include everybody from across the country. For those of you who are online, we're asking you please to use the chat function in Zoom to ask your questions. And I will do my best to summarize those and pose them to the presenters when the time comes. So presenters, when I wave my hand, it means I've got 76 questions to ask too. And I'll try to kind of compress those a little bit so that we get out of here before midnight. But we're excited to be here, and I think that the number of people who have signed up for this, either here in Toronto or online, is an indication of both the anxiety but also the excitement for the new processes. We're eager to learn, we're excited about ministry, and we're hoping that you can share some of the excitement that I know you've been telling me about, so that we can together move forward into 2019. So Bronwyn, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself. And I know you're our first presenter. Give me a minute just to find you on the camera, and over to you. And you're using microphone 2. There you go.
Hello, everyone. You may also be here because I sent you an email in the last week or two and asked you to be here, or strongly indicated you needed to be here. So thank you all for being here in person and online. My name is Bronwyn Corlett. I am the program coordinator for ministry recruitment at the General Counsel Office, and welcome to this webinar. I know we are welcoming candidates and those considering ministry, so those who haven't started the process, as well as those supporting candidates and those just curious about all of the changes. And welcome to Sean and Wanda here, who are going to be helping all of our students, or some of our students, go through this process. So welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Our main presenters today are actually my colleagues. Wendy Cranston is the program coordinator for Ministry Personnel Administration, and Robin McGauley is the program coordinator for Ministry Vocations. Robin is going to present on candidacy pathways this afternoon. We're asking that you ask your questions of her following her presentation. We're hoping that she will answer most of your questions during the presentation. So if you have any questions if you could write those down and see if you still have that question at the end, that would be great. And then Wendy is going to present on the pastoral relations changes that are coming, and she will be taking some questions during, as well as we hope we will still have time at the very end for any questions that you still may have. We are encouraging everyone to type in questions if you are called in or connected, I guess, from afar. If we don't get to questions, I guess, type them all in. So what we're going to try to do is create a document afterwards that will answer as many of those questions that we didn't get to in the presentation, and that document will be posted with the recording of this webinar. And if you're looking for any of this information going forward and further updates as well as further resources, please check out our website, www.united-church.ca. Under leadership and under the pastoral relations sections, all of this information will be posted. So I think that's it. And I'm going to hand it over to Robin.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. That's very loud. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming and joining online. I'm really grateful to be here with you and be able to talk about the changes that are coming in terms of candidacy pathway. My areas of responsibility at the General Counsel Office right now have to do with the implementation of candidacy pathway, and I'm also responsible for the admission process and our mutual recognition agreements with partner denominations. So it's sort of all the policies and procedures related to how people become ministers in the United Church. But today we're going to concentrate on the changes to specifically candidacy pathway, which candidacy pathway is for people who are basically like members who are a part of the United Church who are seeking to be ordained, commissioned, or recognized. So there is so much to talk about, and of course, and we have all the time we need and limited time. So the purpose of this time specifically will be to offer just some broad strokes introduction to candidacy pathway, give you some information about what to expect going forward. We're going to talk specifically for those of you who already are candidates or who have started the process, what you need to know to move in to make that transition into candidacy pathway. And as Bronwyn said, we'll have some time for questions as well to clarify anything as we go. So the main thing to understand about candidacy pathway is that it's based on what we call the 7 phases. So the 7 phases really do shape the whole, they are the grounding of all of candidacy pathway. So the 7 phases they're not sequential. They're intentionally not linear. So they don't point necessarily to a pathway that's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, right? In and of themselves, they're not that. They are the principles that will guide the church and guide those of you who are part of the church who are interested in becoming ministry personnel. It guides the pathway going forward. So I'll just give you a brief introduction. These 7 phases are, they'll be in the manual that will come out in 2019 with a lot more information about what these particular phases mean. What are the values and principles that they point to? So call forth is about the church's intention in saying we need ministry personnel, and the best way to do that is to tell people, you know, I think you're called to ministry, and to provide resources for the church to be about that work of calling forth leaders for the church, for the church we are becoming, right? So it's that the church really taking initiative to identify the future leaders. Identify is the church identifying what kind of leaders we do need for the future and current church, and also someone's ability to name how, you know, to identify that they do feel called in ministry. And it's almost like another word for discernment, right? So to discern that sense of call, to identify what gifts and skills you have for ministry leadership. Accompany is all the support along the way. It's to say we don't walk this journey alone, and so the support of mentors, the support of other people who are going to accompany you on the journey for the whole process to be one where there is support to people, because as we all know, there are lots of complexities and lots of expectations. And so one of the principles is to say that there does need to be support for people along the way. And we're going to talk specifically about one aspect of how that gets lived out more specifically in candidacy pathway. So equip is, those of you who are in the room here, you're likely at Emmanuel College, I'm going to assume, and so you're already engaged in that equip phase. So equip is, what are the educational requirements that are needed, both in terms of what we're now, because of proposals that came to General Council this past summer, calling both credentialing and competency development. Sometimes those things overlap, but depending on what stream of ministry you're engaged in, the credentialing piece is different, and the competency development is also different. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the changes that are coming. Assess is the church's ability to assess someone's capacity and competency for ministry leadership. And authorize is those times when the church says, we're going to authorize you for ministry leadership. So that's really, at what point can a candidate serve under appointment, or at what point does the church say to somebody, yeah, we're going to authorize you for commissioning, recognition, or ordination. And then celebrate. So it's interesting, celebrate, it's at the end in this list, in the phases, and yet, I keep saying we need to move it, we need to move it to the top, because celebrate, if it's at the end of this list, we tend to think that it is what happens at the end, right? It's what happens when you're recognized, commissioned, or ordained. But under candidacy pathway, there's a sense of the church needs to celebrate all the benchmarks along the way, all the new learnings and growth that's happening. And so the candidacy pathway acknowledges that that celebration, that affirmation of candidates really does need to be happening, and not just something that happens just at the end, although it will happen at the end as well. So this little diagram that we did up here is to demonstrate, to give a little visual to the fact that this isn't linear, right? It's like each phase is its own loop in the process, and they intersect and interlink. What we were finding in some of you may be more familiar with the current process under the Presbytery Education and Students, there's an expectation that certain things happen in a particular order, right? It is laid out very linearly. And so candidacy pathway was designed because so many people became what we would call exceptions to a rule. So for example, those who engaged the equip phase, so those who began their theological education as a way to kind of test out their call to see, is this something I'm really able to do, right? That's where in candidacy pathway, there's not an expectation that somebody does something first and then they move on to something second, right? Whereas the current process, there is this sense of you're going to become a candidate and then you're going to start theological education. Whereas candidacy pathway it allows for people to kind of begin at different stages, and for the church to say, all right, we have Carol here who's already started theological education, so knowing that, what is going to be her process going forward. So that's just one example how it's not linear, it's not sequential. All right, so some cultural shifts that the church is going to need to lean into as we move to candidacy pathway. One is around discernment. So if we say to somebody in the church, what's discernment? What's the most common response that we tend to get, do you think? Meetings, yes, there's meetings for discernment. Any other things? Okay, great. That's that we want people to say that it's listening to God, yeah. That maybe they say, well, it's the 1 year process that leads to, the foot in the door in terms of the process to becoming a minister, right? Instead of discernment is, in its broader sense, being attentive to the Spirit's leading, right? Which is something that we need to be doing constantly. Is there something?
A couple of comments online
Yep.
here, exploring and thought-provoking.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes. Wonderful. So, yeah, so in candidacy pathway, there's a shift from, there's no mandatory, like 1 year of discernment at the beginning of the process. There's not a sense of discernment is something that has a fixed kind of programmatic piece or a set timeline. The sense is that all of what you're doing in the candidacy process and even beyond, but certainly in terms of candidacy pathway, what you're doing in the candidacy process and what the church is doing is all discernment. So there's discerning the Spirit's leading throughout everything that you're doing. And so there's an encouragement for people to be constantly attending to that and not seeing that, well, that happened in my first year and now I'm done with that and I need to move on. We need to have a cultural shift in our understanding of what discernment is about. So, yeah, so let's move on to assessment. So there's a sense in the current education and students process that assessment is more based on completion of components, right? There's kind of a list of things that you need to do, and there's more of this, a bit of a checkbox kind of approach, right? To just, did someone complete things? Sometimes we hear the term a lot of, jumping through hoops, and people really wonder, well, what was the point of some of these things that I had to do, right? And so candidacy pathway moves us into, it's not about doing something, it's that the doing is meant to be developing competency for ministry leadership. So the assessment is based on the competency rather than just the checkbox of having done something, okay? So there's a shift there. Decision-making moves from a system where, and some of you may be familiar with this, there's ENS and there's certain things that conference does, and then there's other committees like the conference, internship, education and students committees, all who have done excellent work over the years. And we are grateful for everyone's service in those committees. And there's a sense of having so many levels of engagement and, one group having to make a recommendation where another group is making decision, and the group that's making the decision really maybe isn't the group that maybe has the information. And so some people say, well, a lot of these layers are duplication. So there's a major shift around the one group that makes the decision is called the candidacy board. We'll talk a little bit about what that candidacy board is, but there's one group that's making the decision. So there's no longer a body that's recommending to another body that's actually making the decision. So that's a shift for us in the church. And then again, as I already alluded to in the 7 phases, that the process currently is more of a linear, step-by-step, check box, do things in a particular order. And if you didn't happen to do things in those order, well, then we have to try and figure out, well, what's the order for you, which is what candidacy pathway allows for. So candidacy pathway really is laid out very much on a case-by-case basis, which makes it harder for those presenting to say to you, well, these are the things, some people really like to see it laid out. But you're not going to see it laid out until you engage with the candidacy board, and they're going to see who you are, what are the needs for competency development, what are the things that you need to be doing, and they will lay out the process on a case-by-case basis for you. So that's a big shift, right? It moves us more from into an equity model, right? So not everyone's going to be doing the same things. The pathway is geared toward your specific needs for formation. All right, so let's just talk a bit about the candidacy boards and the structure under which candidacy pathway takes place. So hopefully you've all heard about the shift to Office of Vocation, right? All the different remits and the restructuring of all the church. And so a decision was made that the candidacy process would fall under the umbrella of the Office of Vocation. So this diagram gives an overview of what the Office of Vocation structure is in terms of having a board of vocation and committees that really take the work of presbytery, historically the presbytery oversight and discipline aspects. So they're moved into the Office of Vocation. So these committees are focused on that work. And then there's an arrow from the Board of Vocation over to the candidacy boards, because they're what we call commissions, which means that they, as I said, right, there's going to be one body, they have the power to make the decision, which governance-wise had to be set up, that they have the authority of the Board of Vocation in order to just make the decision. Because if it wasn't set up that way, then the candidacy boards would have needed to make a recommendation that the Board of Vocation would have then had to have actually made the final decision. So that's why that was set up that way. So there will be 7 candidacy boards across the country, right, that are just situated geographically across the country. A lot of people, maybe there's a cultural shift here too, but some people seem to be thinking that they're rooted somehow in the regional councils. No, they're not a part of the regional council structure. They're just placed geographically across the country. And so current candidates, as you make the transition, will be assigned to a candidacy board. And people who are new, who will be making an application to become a candidate, will also, by the Office of Vocation, be assigned to a candidacy board.
Robin, if I could just interrupt for a minute. The folks online are having trouble reading the PowerPoint because it's the type is a little small, and when I'm broadcasting, it degrades the picture, so it's not as crisp as it is on your screen. They're asking if you could please read what the words say in the different boxes so that they know what you're talking about.
Okay, so there's a triangle, what is that, a square? There's a diamond in the center that says board, which it's really the Board of Vocation. To the right, is it their right? In the green, if you're not colorblind, in a box says response committee, and then there's an arrow down that says remedial committee, and then the next one below the Board of Vocation says standards for accreditation. Those don't pertain to candidacy pathway. This is just a diagram of the Office of Vocation. So you don't need to worry about that right at the moment. You can watch any Office of Vocation webinars, that kind of thing, to understand what those committees will do. To the left, where there's that arrow and there's a bigger, longer rectangle, which says candidacy boards at the top, and then it names the 7 candidacy boards. So there's the Mountain Candidacy Board, so rooted on the West Coast, and then moving across the country, we have the Prairie Candidacy Board, then the North and Central Ontario, Southwestern Ontario, Quebec and Eastern Ontario, the Atlantic Candidacy Board, and at the bottom it says Council on Learning, which is currently the name that one of the candidacy boards is reserved for the Indigenous Church, and so currently that's what they're choosing to call themselves. That could change. All right, that's good? All right, so I just want to talk about what current candidates can expect moving into 2019. So as I said, you'll be assigned to a candidacy board. There are the staff of the Office of Vocation. So there are 7 Office of Vocation ministers who each one relates to one of the candidacy boards. So that Office of Vocation minister, depending on which candidacy board you're assigned to, will contact you in the beginning of the new year. So kind of by March. So this is just if you're a current candidate, you've already started the process and are named a candidate. So if you don't hear from somebody in the Office of Vocation by about March, call myself or Bronwyn so that we can see what kind of fell through the cracks, all right? So the Office of Vocation Minister will just get you set up to say, okay, this is where, an initial assessment of where you're at in the process. When do we expect that you should meet with the candidacy board, depending on where you're at, right? That there may not be need for an immediacy. or there may be if you're expecting to begin your supervised ministry education in 2019, that kind of thing. So the Office of Vocation Minister will assess that and get you set up on what's called Church Hub. Wendy's going to talk a little bit more about Church Hub and its functioning in terms of the pastoral relations system. But Church Hub is the online portal that basically for candidacy pathway for candidates, it will be the place where your file is kept and you will have some responsibility to upload files. So, you know, in the current system where you've had to sign a whole pile of paperwork and it seems to be all these paper forms and what really happens with them, there's no more paper forms in the new system. It's all through this online portal. So that's why we mean by those of you who are current candidates, we need to see, well, what does your setup look like in Church Hub, because you're moving from an old system into a new one, and we'll just get you set up on that in the new year. And then you'll meet with the candidacy board when it makes sense to do that, and they and you will talk about your pathway going forward. So again, with that case-by-case basis in mind, right? Okay. So if you're currently an inquirer, so an inquirer is somebody who has been approved, like in the old system, approved to start the process. You're working with your discernment committee. And so we had instructed presbyteries and conferences to say to current inquirers that if that 1 year that you're meant to be in your discernment process spans over into 2019, then, I mean, the discernment process is still a good process to get you discerning and thinking about all the things that are required for ministry. And so to just, you know, to keep going until you've discerned into 2019 to a point that you feel like you would be ready to meet with the candidacy board. So it would be great if if the discernment committee can write its report as it normally would, and because the candidacy board then can take all of that into consideration, and that will be really helpful for them as well. And we can look at then what parts of the application do you not need to fill in then. And so again, when things are up and running in January, to be able to access the online portal to make an application and just follow the instructions that are provided online. It'll all be on the website in terms of what you do from there to submit an application. And then again, you'll meet with the candidacy board, and your process will be outlined for you from there. All right, so if you haven't started at all, then again, come January, the process will be to what you need to do to get started will be clearly outlined. There are as much as we say, well, it's a case-by-case basis, in order to become a candidate, there are still certain things that everyone doesn't, like you need to submit a police records check, you do need to do the mandatory trainings, all of those things will be listed out. So it's all going to be very clear. And so again, just follow the instructions, submit an application to meet with the candidacy board, and begin the work of intentionally discerning, right? Begin to learn about what the streams of ministry are. If you're not engaged in theological education yet, then explore the different schools and the different requirements. Speak to different ministers. That's going to be one of the requirements of an application is to meet with somebody that you would have considered a mentor, to discuss your sense of call with them. And so you can begin to just have those conversations if you feel like you haven't really started yet at all. All right, so I'm now moving into some of the other things that are just really important to know in terms of what will be a part of the pathway. So remember I said there's one of the phases is the accompaniment phase, right? So one of the ways that accompaniment gets lived out in candidacy pathway is through what's called a circle of accompaniment. So a circle of accompaniment meets specific, has a specific role and purpose. So things like helping somebody navigate all the requirements of the pathway. So that can be people in the church who just really, who know the process well. It can be helping somebody to prepare for an interview with the candidacy board. So maybe it's doing kind of mock interview or asking questions or helping them refine the kinds of things that the candidacy board, their responses to the kinds of things the candidacy board might ask. It includes, again, remember that principle of discernment is an ongoing process that never ends. So the circle of accompaniment is a place to be intentional about that ongoing discernment. So a place to reflect and to listen and to ask questions, and to say, is this, I'm going to keep discerning my sense of call, and to have people to reflect with on that is really important. So we've named that there's two formats to a circle of accompaniment. So a lot of people think of a circle being, a group of people that's going to meet together. And that could be one of the formats, right? The other format can be what we're calling a dispersed circle. So it could be that it's individuals who've been identified that can meet those specific roles. And we did that because there are streams of ministry. So like the diaconal stream, where at the Center for Christian Studies, what's built into the program is a diaconal mentor, there's peer groups, that kind of thing. And so to have a circle of people that you're having to meet with, it all felt a little redundant, right? Or just expectations that weren't necessary. And so again, it's a conversation between the candidacy board and the applicant or candidate themselves, to say, okay, what model for support is going to suit you based on where you're at in the process, what are the requirements of the program of study that you're in, those kinds of things, right? So if you're currently a candidate, again, depending on where you're at, this will just be a conversation when you meet with the candidacy board. If you're nearing the end, say you're in your last year, it may not be necessary to set up a circle of accompaniment. If you're closer to the beginning, that's going to be a conversation to have. It may be that simply, you're meeting with the spiritual director regularly. Those kinds of things would meet the expectations of that accompaniment phase. Okay. All right, so the other thing to talk specifically about is the equip phase. And the equip phase can be quite complex because, of course, it depends on what stream you're in, what program of study you're in, right? There's so much to talk about, but I just want to talk about the one piece that feels like a major change. And so just to say that there's no change to the program at the Center for Christian Studies or the diaconal stream. They do field placements through the center. And so just to ease people's minds around, no change with that. There's no change to programs where supervised ministry education is integrated into the degree, the Master of Divinity degree. So the summer distance program at the Atlantic School of Theology, those folks are already doing 5 years in ministry, 2 of which are already deemed totally equivalent to supervised ministry education. And so no change there. The program at St. Andrew's College in Saskatoon also includes a ministry residency that's 20 months, and they do mandatory clinical pastoral unit of clinical pastoral education. And so there again, there's no need for a change. So what is changing is those of you who are in the ordination stream, who are in what we would call an on-campus program for the Master of Divinity. So you're doing an academic 3-year program, and then the expectation is that you would do supervised ministry education, most likely after you graduate. And that's where the proposal came to the General Council this summer around the church's desire to move into a competency-based assessment approach based on the learning outcomes for ministry leadership, and to say that in order for the church to both assess somebody's competence for ministry leadership and for the person themselves to have a significant and meaningful experience, that is moving into a normative of 2 years for supervised ministry education. So I know some of you that's going to feel like a rather large change. And so we acknowledge that may be difficult to hear. And there's many reasons why the church wanted to move into this model. One being it used to be, I always hesitate to say back in my day, but it used to be that the supervised ministry education component for the ordination stream happened, you did 2 years of your MDiv, then you went away for 8 months on internship, and then you came back for your final year of your MDiv. So in that final year, there was more opportunity for integration of learnings, and the fact then that the church in that final year was able to assess your full experience in supervised ministry education. So to move it to the end of the Master of Divinity, and then the timing is such that, the church is really then assessing someone's competence for ministry only when they've had, 3 or 4 months of being able to develop those competencies. And that's not a sufficient amount of time. And so there's this need to make that greater. And this was tested, again, I didn't talk about the pilot projects, but 3 conferences piloted candidacy pathway. And this was one of the pieces that was certainly a part of the Bay of Quinte conference pathway and the Manitou conference pathway, that 2 years was a requirement for supervised ministry education. So I mentioned the learning outcomes for ministry leadership, and here, this actually does come into play with all streams of ministry. So this is the church's sort of list, for lack of a better word, of the competencies that we expect in our leaders today. And so the learning outcomes for ministry leadership will be woven into how you develop learning goals, no matter which stream of ministry you're in. If you're doing supervised ministry education, then using the learning outcomes as the basis for developing learning goals and developing your competency will certainly be used. So again, kind of programmatically, this will be a piece that you'll see at play. The learning outcomes for ministry leadership have actually been something that the church has been maybe not using. We've had them since 2007 or 2006. We just haven't animated them enough. And so that was one of the things that was asked for in candidacy pathway, is that these become a part of the equip phase and the assess phase. So they're available online. As Bronwyn said, you can go to the website, and we've already started to include some of the resources that you're going to need to look at to make your way into candidacy pathway. And so in the leadership section, and follow the links to candidacy pathway, and there's a download where you can already see the 33 learning outcomes, the document there, and begin to engage in that and learn about that, and be ready for that transition into using them. All right. Are there questions? We'll just need the microphone for those in the room.
Oh yes, there are lots of questions online.
I'm sure there are lots of questions.
Just to set the minds at ease of the people online.
I'm going to say one thing about questions. If you have questions that are very specific to you, like my scenario, I'm going to need to, that needs to be, I think, said separately. So questions need to be ones that everyone might benefit from the answer from. Yes, go ahead.
I'll try. Yeah. Mine is kind of individual, but I don't know how to, I think it will be helpful for other people as well. So I have not started the inquirer process because I have not been able to, due to the requirements of the old system where you had to be a member, a confessing member of the church for 2 years. I had been involved in the church for 6 years, but only did my confirmation just under 2 years ago. So in this new process, can I start in January?
Yeah.
And how does that begin? Because I'm already in my second year of school and I've already done a lot of discernment, like how does this all
Yeah,
start to
great.
fit in?
So that was one of the things of Candidacy Pathway, was to look at what are the upfront barriers for people and are they really necessary? So that's a perfect example. So in Candidacy Pathway, anyone can start. You can make an application. You can be journeying with the candidacy board. In order to be named a candidate, you do have to be a member. Okay, and in order to be named a candidate, you also have to be active in the United Church for 2 years, right? So that's a pretty significant change. So, but in order to start and to have a conversation and to know what the pathway is and to meet with the candidacy board, that you can do that at any time. It's just for them to make you a candidate. You would need to be a member and active for 2 years.
Can't hear you. Let's use a mic, please.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. So an active member in the church, does that directly relate to whether or not you have done your confirmation? Because you can be active in a church and be doing everything in the church, but I only did my confirmation 2 years ago, but I've been involved for 5.
I wouldn't get too specific about it. You need to be a member and you need to be actively involved in the church for 2 years. We're gonna have, like, broadly speaking, active involvement, and that could mean many things, right? I would say you've been engaged in theological education at a United Church school in a United Church context. That to me seems like active involvement in the church for 2 years. Other people might have different interpretations, but we're getting on the same page with the candidacy board about how we might interpret those things. But I would say the church needs to see itself as broader than pastoral charge engagement. Could be someone experienced camps. There's lots of different ministries of the United Church. Okay.
Let me pose a couple of the questions that are online. There's a constellation of questions about the candidacy board. So let me try to group them together. Is the candidacy board part of the Office of Vocation, or is it located in each region? When do we start meeting with them? My final interview is tomorrow. Assuming I'm approved, am I still going to have to do this candidacy board thing?
Okay, there's
3 to share. I've got 13 online. So,
okay. I did say the candidacy boards are a part of the Office of Vocation. They are not a part of the regional councils. Okay, they're just placed geographically. I think that answers that.
Sure, thank you.
What was there's something about it's
when do we start meeting with the board
well, again, so the Office of Vocation Minister, if you're currently a candidate, the Office of Vocation Minister of the board that you've been assigned to will contact you early in the new year to talk about when that will happen, right? For some who need to begin their supervised ministry education, in 2019, we need to identify, they will meet with a candidacy board sooner. If there's not a need to meet with the candidacy board sooner, it will happen, later in the spring or in the fall. So do you want to talk more about that, Bronwyn?
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of you have filled out a candidacy transition form in the last week or two. In that form, I've asked if you think you need an interview in the first 3 months of the new year. If you haven't seen that form, please go onto our website and fill it out, and you're a candidate. Or if you have a question about a specific thing, you can please email me at bcorlett@united-church.ca, and I can try to triage any specific question in that. I'll answer the last question I heard. If you have a final interview in the next month or two before the year is out, assuming that everything goes well at that final interview, you will not need to meet with a candidacy board in the new year.
Yeah, that the recommendation will, it'll move its way through the system in order for you to be commissioned, ordained, or recognized at the time when the regional council is holding a service of celebration of ministries. Yeah.
We have a question.
Okay.
Hi, Robin. Just a quick question. The supervised ministry education, does that have to be done after you finish your educational requirements, or can it be done concurrently?
That's something to talk with the candidacy board about. Best practice is to say that it should be done after, but again, there may be cases where there's really good reason for it to be done concurrently, or a piece of it or something. So that's something, again, case by case, depending on the person, to discuss with the candidacy board. When is the right time? What's the right type of supervised ministry education? When is it going to happen? What are the learning goals going to be? Typically someone should have, historically the kind of policy was that you had 2 years of your Master of Divinity complete before, if you're in a on-campus program, before you move into supervised ministry education. But again, that's going to be kind of a case-by-case basis.
You know how we like forms.
Would you mind standing so that people online can see you? Thank you.
Okay, I guess two things. So as a college, I guess we will still be doing some sort of reporting to the church. Now, you're saying that the students are supposed to upload these forms, so I'm assuming then I don't have to mail anything to candidacy boards?
Yeah, so all of this, how the online thing works, it'll all become clear. We've already been working with kind of denominational formation people at the schools around what the report looks like, because it will include now the learning outcomes and assessment of the learning outcomes, as well as the same kinds of questions that schools already respond to in terms of their annual report. It's looking like, and this may change, but at the moment what we've discussed with the IT people is that each of the theological schools will have a login access to go right into the portal, fill out the evaluation or the report for the students you have, and submit it right there. So where things are documents that you need to write up in Word for whatever reason, then yeah, it'll all be clear as to how things get uploaded, but a lot of things are just online forms themselves. So it's really just filling in what's required in those fields and hitting submit. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're getting, let me find myself on the screen here. We're getting a number of questions of people who are fairly late in the process. Somebody says, I have my MDiv, I'm just coming up to the internship. What about the ordination interview? Other people saying, I'm almost done. How do I fit into the transitional process?
Yeah. So again, I think these individual cases really do need to, the Office of Vocation Ministers will be set up, come in January. And so that conversation needs to happen there. If for those, I mean, I've already met some students at theological schools where I've gone to and done presentations who are anticipating completing their Master of Divinity if they're in the ordination stream, and hoping to begin supervised ministry education, by the fall of 2019, and haven't engaged the process at all. And so if those folks can be in touch with Bronwyn and myself, there are certain things that right away we can get them started on in order that they're ready early in the new year to submit the application to become what would be called an applicant, in order for the candidacy board to meet with them and make them a candidate as soon as they can, and give them access to be able to begin the process of seeking a supervised ministry education site. Okay.
I think I'm detecting some anxiety that
Sure.
people are late in the process.
Yeah.
And they're wishing they could just be grandfathered because they already know how the old process works.
Yeah.
So why isn't that possible?
Well, there's lots of reasons why the grandparenting can't happen, right? So for one is that the structures that exist that support the current system will no longer exist whatsoever. So there's really no way that we can grandparent people in. Some people do things very part-time, and it could take years. So if we grandparented people in, it would probably take like 15 years to work its way through the system. Candidacy pathway really is a better process. I mean, Did I just say that? I mean, why
You're
would
not
we be
supposed to
why
say
would we be moving to it if it wasn't better? It's more streamlined. The key words we say are it's nimble, responsive, and flexible, right? So you should want to move into candidacy pathway. It's going to be better. You should want to spend time learning and engaging and deepening of learning. So I know that the piece around 2 years of SME feels like it's this added piece. But being ministry personnel is a huge undertaking. And this piece is really to get you prepared. I know that if I were to move back into congregational ministry, I would get a mentor. I'd seek out a supervisor for myself. Like, I wouldn't try to do that alone, right? So I think it's about us shifting our thinking into, again, that just checkbox of I'm doing all the right things, and really engage, what does it mean to be a lifelong learner? How do I foster those relationships that get me to a place to understand that ministry is large. I need to know a lot. If that takes a really long time, it's, you know, you're still able to do ministry. SME is going to happen under appointment for the most part, where you're getting paid salary and pension and benefits, right? So, yeah, not to downplay that there's anxiety about it.
In our day, we didn't earn pension when we were students.
Back in our day, we got $400 stipend a month, so.
With the supervised ministry placement, I know in the eight-month process, it was, you were allowed to kind of split it up between parish ministry and other. Is it going to be the same? Are you going to be able to pick and choose what you do?
Great question. So supervised ministry education, again, the whole thing needs to be discussed with your candidacy board. So really the starting place is, what competencies do and what learning goals do I need to have? And then what does that mean in terms of where is the setting? What type of supervised ministry education will be the best place to meet those goals? So to your point more specifically, if that means that doing a unit of clinical pastoral education for 4 months full-time and then moving into a pastoral charge under appointment, that's an excellent scenario. It may be that you do 2 one-year appointments in a pastoral charge in order to get a different context of ministry, or you do the whole thing in one place, the 2 years. So there are options, but the options can't just be, well, I could want to. It needs to be what's going to be the best context for the learning, and the candidacy board will be, you'll be in discussion with them about that. Yeah, good question. Yes.
So at the current length of time for doing the MDiv is 6 years.
If you're full-time, it's 3.
It's 3, but if it's part-time, it's 6.
Okay.
So does that now mean that with the 2 extra years of supervised ministry, that it's still 6 years? Because that really changes everything.
So if you're in an on-campus, so if you're at Emmanuel College, you're going to do your Master of Divinity. That's its own standalone piece. So the amount of time that you're doing that is up to you and Emmanuel College. The amount of time that you're in supervised ministry education is up to you and the church. And right now the church is saying that the norm for that will be 2 years. So I don't know how else to answer your question. Like, there's no correlation. The 2 years doesn't impact your amount of time you're in your MDiv with Emmanuel College.
So if I've already worked 15 years with the United Church, including congregational ministry, that means I have to do 2 more years of congregational ministry.
So this is pointing to a thing that the candidacy boards are still working out in terms of the interpretation of that policy. So here's what's interesting, right? So when the church sets a policy that uses the word norm, so there's a normative 2 years, the norm, there could be exceptions to the norm, but only you have to be like, if you don't do 2 years, it would only be according to certain exceptions. We're still working out what all that means, and the exceptions aren't yet clear, whatever. The difficulty we're having is that to have exceptions to a norm kind of contravenes the whole point of the principle of candidacy pathway, that it's case by case. But more to your point, I think the hope is that the candidacy boards have some way of being a little bit flexible about those 2 years for cases of people who've been very engaged in ministry leadership over the years, you know, or there's something about the timing between when the SME started, supervised ministry education SME, that when it started versus when the expected celebration of ministry service is going to happen, that if it's short, like a month, I mean, really, are we going to get stickly about that? But that's going to be up to the candidacy boards to decide. Okay, yeah. Back there. How are we doing for time? Okay, 5 more minutes.
I'll make it quick. So I know that the candidacy commissions in each of these different regions will be overlooking the SME sites, sorry, no acronyms, supervised ministry education sites. I know that in the past I was Bay of Quinte and we had candidacy pathway and we had a really big problem with getting full-time SME sites, right. That we didn't actually have any. So I was kind of wondering what's going on in that quarter of things. What's the church kind of planning to do around getting full-time SME sites for us?
Right. So there's a difference between what the requirement is. So you don't have to be in full-time in order to meet the SME requirements. So it's actually a minimum. The position has to be half-time. But I think more than SME, I mean, generally speaking, the church needs to do some work around full-time positions, broader than supervised ministry education, right? So I think that's a bigger issue around how do churches cluster together to have you know, ministry leadership that's shared amongst churches so that people have full-time employment, those kinds of things. So I think we need to think broader about that. And yes, certainly in the supervised ministry education. So I don't have any specific answers for that. It's something that is a challenge and that the whole church needs to be attending to. Yeah, thanks, Morgan.
Hi.
Yes.
So if a student had a conflict with the board, is there going to be some way of appeal, or is there an ombudsperson or something to help the student through that?
Yeah, so like the current process, that decisions of the candidacy board can be appealed through the judicial committee, but they would follow the grounds for appeal that are laid out in the manual, section J10. I just looked it up this morning. J10.6.
Any questions from online?
Gosh, there's all kinds of questions online.
I'm sure there are.
I am struggling to kind of sort through them because I know we are running out of time. A lot of them about supervision. Concern, is there going to be new training required for the supervisors? Are we going to have more supervisors? There seems to be a concern that there just aren't enough on the ground. Okay, so yes, good point. So educational supervisors, the answer at the moment is stay the course, right? What is coming in like 2020, because the workload is already set out for 2019. In 2020, we will be looking at what are the needs for educational supervisors in terms of their Ministry of Supervision course that they take. We're going to really need to do some work on how do educational supervisors and the whole piece around the learning outcomes for ministry leadership and the SME, what further training is needed for that. Yes, we as the church need to be looking at how do we get more educational supervisors, how do we equip people better for that work. And there was something else I was going to say in relation to that. Oh, the piece around off-site supervision. So giving more training or a sense of what can supervision, or are there changes to how supervision looks if it's done through technology, right? So I think we're going to need to rely on that a lot more. There will be a supervised ministry education handbook. And
which will be available online. Educational, just as an additional piece, educational supervisors will be, are under the oversight of the Office of Vocation, and the Office of Vocation will name an educational supervisor for the candidate. So that's a bit of a change as well, that currently there's I mean, this is contextual or geographical as well, but learning sites often needed to come with a learning site, but now we're wanting educational supervisors to be specific for the candidate, and so that's a bit of a shift. But more will come around SME. There's a lot more for us to understand in relation to that and how they're set up, and how learning sites are established under the regional council system, and all of that. I think will be in the new year, we'll have some more information, maybe another webinar or something.
We need to move along,
we do.
and Bronwyn is saying that too. I simply wanted to say to the online folks, I will make a copy of every question that people online have typed, and I will forward it on to Robin. Robin, there's a request that you use this to create an FAQ page.
Right.
And so if you're willing to do that and accept all of the written questions that people have typed, we can create an FAQ page. We can post that together with the recording of this event when that's posted, and then the folks online can kind of calm down a little bit and hear Wendy.
And I just need to say that there's still, the resources are still to come. So this isn't, you know, in some ways we also need to go, okay, like our questions, maybe we just need to be patient a little bit more to give me time to finish drafting all the resources. Unless your questions mean that I'm drafting pieces that can just be cut and pasted into resources, but we need some more, we need time to still do that, to get them up. Maybe those resources will answer some of your questions. If you still have questions, you'll answer them then. So that's just to say that I will do my best, but I still have a huge workload to do to give you the fuller picture that everyone's gonna need as well. Okay.
So keep asking your questions. We will find answers or provide them. Now, Wendy is going to present on some of the changes to pastoral relations that are coming. She is willing to take some questions during her presentation. So if you have one, just raise your hand. But we might cut you short if we have too many questions.
You have a mic?
I have a mic.
Just keep talking and it'll
I'm going to keep talking, and now it's working.
There we go.
So good afternoon, late afternoon, everybody. Robin and I thought that it would be helpful for me to come and talk to you a little bit about pastoral relations as well, now that you've heard about Candidacy Pathway, because of how pastoral relations overlaps with Candidacy Pathway. So my sense is that there's at least a couple of you who will already have appointments. Is that right? None of you have appointments within the church? So perhaps there's some folks online who have appointments already, who are serving part-time within pastoral charges already. And if that is true, then you will, at the end of November, be getting an invitation to join Church Hub, which is going to be the new pastoral relations system online. So the United Church, as we all know, loves forms. We love collecting information on forms. And finally, after all of this time, we are going to try to get our forms online. And we're going to do this through a system called Church Hub, which over time will include Candidacy Pathway. It will include our pastoral relations system. And it will be our whole pastoral relations system, not just our forms. So this summer at General Council, there was some changes to our pastoral relations policy. We made some changes to our definition of covenant, to our needs assessment policy. We changed away from needs assessment, which was what churches used to explain what their ministry needs were. And we're moving towards what we're calling profiles, both ministry personnel profiles and community of faith profiles. And both of those will be posted online on our Church Hub system. We are moving towards Church Hub so that everyone will need to use it. So if you are a minister searching for a community of faith in which to serve or any ministry position, you will build a profile and post it online. And any community of faith who is searching for a ministry personnel will also build a profile and post it online. And there will be a whole bunch of filters that you can use to search for positions that you would like to serve in, and all of that will work online. Presbytery representatives to the whole system will be replaced by regional council liaisons, and governing bodies of communities of faith will be able to make some of the decisions that used to be filled by whole congregational meetings in order to kind of speed up what our pastoral relations system was before. So Church Hub is, I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on Church Hub because there's going to be some training webinars that will be available online starting on Monday. And so, yeah, I will post the invitations to the Church Hub training, and then also the webinars will be recorded, and anyone who wants to participate in them or watch the recorded webinars for Church Hub can do that, and they'll be posted all on the Pastoral Relations website on the United Church of Canada webpage. Does anyone have any questions so far?
What number is on your mic, please?
Number two. We're in the process of searching for a minister. So all we have is your JNAC. That's already posted on our website.
Okay.
My question then is, can that be used as a profile, or do we need to redo the JNAC for the profile?
That is a fabulous question. Thank you very much. So the church's profile is sort of all of the components plus what a JNAC used to be. And so the components of a profile for a community of faith online will include the financial pieces, the demographics, as well as a piece that we're calling a living faith story. And the living faith story is the piece that the church uses to express its ministry needs and its articulation of the gospel. And so the church can use anything that it wants for its living faith story. And so if you already have a needs assessment, use that. If you've already written it, don't do redundant work. Just use that. The other piece that we're working towards, and this will come just after Christmas, is churches, the denomination asks churches to fill out a lot of forms, like a lot of forms. And so if you, as a congregation, fill out blue forms that for information that goes into the yearbook, that will be an online piece and will auto-populate information that we ask you for as part of your profile. So when you go on to, if you're part of a congregation and you go on to your Church Hub page as part of the congregation and you click onto your profile page and onto any of your demographics, it will be auto-populated by what you've put in already for your yearbook pieces.
Your mic is so far away from your mouth that people are having trouble hearing you. So I'm going to
Is
switch
this
mics
better?
and give you this one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better, folks?
Hang on, I haven't turned it on yet.
So it's not better yet.
There, try that.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're really trying to do is to ensure that the information that we ask you for, both as ministry personnel and as members of congregations, that you can use that information for all the reasons that you need to use it, but not enter it over and over and over as you have had to do before. For ministry personnel, for minister profiles, there will be a space to post a resume, there will be a space to post articulation in ministry, and articulation of the gospel for ministry and all of the denominational standing pieces that are necessary.
Yeah, I'm Charles. I'm from Uganda Matters United Church of Canada. So my question is, I was appointed by the conference for 3 years in Uganda Matters, and I'm also doing training with St. Andrews. So with these changes coming in January, will the new region how is it going to be in terms of the appointment by the conference for these years that I'm already serving?
So
will I have to meet with them and rewrite or continue with this? They will honor it, or I don't know.
Nothing will change with your appointment for the time being. Like, your appointment will continue to the end of the time that it's currently set, but instead of being a covenant with Uganda Methodist and Toronto Conference, it will be with Uganda Methodist and the region that Toronto Conference is becoming. So we've talked a little bit about profiles. I'm just gonna, because we think we're kind of running out of time here, we're going to talk just a little bit about the implementation timelines. We have a webinar that's available on Monday, and if you want to participate in that live, you can do that, and it will also be recorded and it will be posted to the Pastoral Relations website. In addition, on the Pastoral Relations website, there are also other webinars that are posted there about the pastoral relations system and more details about our pastoral relations system and the changes that are occurring between what our current system is and the system that we're moving towards. On November 26th, we're going to start sending Church Hub email invites to ministry personnel. So for any of you who are candidates who are currently ministers or ministry personnel currently serving in appointments, please look for that invite. If you do not get an invite by the new year, then please email to ministry@united-church.ca. All of the new pastoral relations policy will be in effect by January 1st. And any new information about pastoral relations will be on the pastoral relations website at Leadership Supporting Ministry Pastoral Relations. And if you have any other questions, then you can email us at ministry@united-church.ca. And I think that that's it. Unless we have questions.
Hi, I heard that there would be some filters or blinders for some of the information on either the profiles of the ministers or the locations. Is that true?
So I'll address the word blinders first.
Okay, sorry, I didn't
No,
know what to call
that's
it.
totally fine. But it's a good way for me to share that when you are ministry personnel and you post a profile as available, it can be posted in one of two or three ways. You can prepare your profile and you can post it as available for call or appointment, or you can post it as available for pulpit supply, which is very helpful if you're a candidate and you are busy with school, but you're available just for Sundays for pulpit supply. And who can see it is churches that are also searching. So other ministers cannot see your profile, and neither can churches who are not searching. Only churches who are also have a posted profile can see your profile. Churches who build a profile and post it as available to call or appoint or available in search of pulpit supply can see other churches' profiles as well, and they can see all the ministry profiles. So that's sort of who can see what when things are posted. Is that clear? Yeah. And then there's filters. for ministry and for community of faith profiles. And so how that works is that you can get on and say, I am interested in pulpit supply, but I'm at Emmanuel, and so I'm only available for churches in Toronto. And so only in region 6. And so I'll just collect available to regions this and this, and only for pulpit supply. And it would only give you those churches. Or you can search, I'm available for call, for full-time, I'm available to these regions. You can, there'll be language filters. You can select churches that are only affirming. There's like a whole bunch of different filters that you can search by. And yeah. And then the ministers can search ministry personnel, not in exactly the same ways, but in some of the same ways. So if ministers indicate that they're only available for appointments that are part-time, then you would be found in that way.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, sorry. So a question then on access. How would the church access this website? Or how, in terms of, is there a password that will be given to the church? Can anybody just go in and look, or just those from the church who's looking can go in and look, or how would that work?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So it's not a public website. Church Hub, the website address is churchhub.ca. It's not a public website. It's a website that's actually built on a SharePoint website, so a Microsoft-based website. It's all of the data is in Canada. And both ministry personnel and churches will receive an invitation to the website. At first, communities of faith will have one login that will be their church administrator. In the new year, we will build additional logins for communities of faith, so that a community of faith will have the ability to have an administrator login, maybe a minister login, a search committee chair login. So we'll work towards additional logins for the communities of faith in the new year, but the initial login will just be one login for a community of faith. Yeah.
So if we're doing our SME right now, will we get one of those emails on November 26th?
If your SME is an appointment, yes.
Can you define appointment in this context? Like an internship, is that an appointment?
No, so if you were in the part of the matching system, then you're in what's called a placement, and that's not an appointment. So appointments are under the pastoral relations system, right? Does that make sense? That the presbytery approved it, versus if you're in what was historically called an internship, then that's a placement. And so one way to check is if you have pension and benefits, you're in an appointment. If you don't have pension and benefits as a part of your package, you're likely in a placement. Did I get that right?
Okay, so that does clarify it. But
yeah.
For those of us who are in internships, which are placements,
yep.
Church Hub sounds like a great way to try and find a job. So are we going to be able to sign up on Church Hub and put our profiles there?
So the plan is that so candidates who are currently, as Wendy said, candidates who are in an appointment are considered ministry personnel. So they will get rolled into access to Church Hub in the end of November and into December. All other candidates, we're still working on what candidacy pathway, like what the profile includes, and that will roll out in January. Right, so candidates who are, a good example is if you're in the ordination stream, or if you're in any stream, and your final interview, which should be happening by the new year, if you're anticipating being commissioned, recognized, or ordained in 2019, then the current system should be doing that final interview. Really you just need to wait a few more weeks till you get access to Church Hub to then be able to begin searching for your first appointment or call in order to be commissioned, ordained, or recognized, right?
Yes, so to clarify, and all candidates will be on Church Hub in the next few months, like by April at the latest. We expect all candidates to be on Church Hub. Does that make sense? Was there any questions from online?
There are several.
All right, we have about 10 minutes.
Glad to share them.
Okay.
One of the questions that comes up every time we do this, and that is about internet security and data breaches. So what are you doing to make sure that we don't get treated the way Microsoft is, or one of the big guys who get hacked? How do we make sure that all of our personal information is safe?
Well, we have ensured that all of the servers, all of our data is on servers that are in Canada. And I know that I was in a security meeting about our data yesterday, in which we were all being instructed about what levels of security we would be given, and that we are all going to have to sign into our laptops and then wait to get a code that pops up on our cell phones that we will enter in order to even get into our laptops. Yep. So I would actually encourage that question just to come to the General Counsel Office, or IT can answer it.
Sure.
Because I'm the pastoral relations person.
No, that's fair, and we will of course add that to the FAQ.
Yep.
Because it's here in the list of questions, but
Yep.
it's been raised at every webinar we've
Yep.
done together, and it's one that makes us all anxious. So thank you.
Yep.
Two other questions. One about rural churches that don't necessarily have internet access. How are they going to get into churchhub.ca if they don't have an internet access, an internet address?
So we did a survey of the majority of our churches and found that we did not have any churches that had no access at all. We had churches that had limited access and differing access, meaning that we had some churches that did not have high speed, but we had that had no access.
Helpful, thank you. And one last question.
Oh, and Robin is reminding me that what we've built is also mobile friendly.
Thank you. And so the next question, you referred to a webinar on Monday that you're inviting people to, and somebody says it's not hosted on United in Learning, so it must be offered on some other platform. Can you tell them how to register?
Yes. So if you are ministry personnel, you should be getting, either by the end of the day today, well, I guess it's getting close to the end of the day today, or tomorrow morning, you should be getting an invitation to that webinar, and it's going to be on a Zoom call, same as today. If you do not get that, then it should be posted on the Pastoral Relations website. And if it's not there now, then I will make sure it is tomorrow morning.
So you said there were no churches that didn't have internet access. I think you meant that there were no churches that didn't have individuals or leaders without email addresses. And there are lots of churches without internet coming into the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in St. Andrews, we have students or ministers from everywhere in the country, and we hear a lot about ministers who, for some reason, some of these rural areas, most people, they are shortage. According to you and the new plan with the reason, what plan do they have in terms of these shortages in the rural area where people don't want to go, and yet services are there and they need to be served?
Is your question about just shortages of ministers?
In rural areas.
Yes. So that is much more than a church hub question. This summer, there was a number of proposals that went to the General Counsel about that very issue. And a number of the proposals came out of Manitoba and Northwestern Ontario. where there is a string of the currently existing conference that has 72 pastoral charges with no ministry personnel. And so there is a joint steering group that is starting in the new year to discuss both the needs of remote and rural ministry and changes to policy around lay ministry within the church. You're welcome.
So we have about 5 minutes to go. Are there more questions from online? Any more questions in here? I'll give it to Steve. Oh, one more?
Sure, go ahead.
I've heard you use the word to be recognized. What does that mean?
Recognized means if you are going through the designated lay ministry program, at the end of your program, you are recognized.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And there was a concern online. You said that candidates would all be on Church Hub by April. That's too late for people who want a job in May. So can you clarify that, please?
I can clarify. I was being generous. Most people should be on it in January. I was just saying at the absolute latest. If you are having issues, oh, I can stand. If you are having issues getting onto Church Hub, if you are looking for a job, any of these things can be raised with your Office of Vocation Minister when they reach out to you in the new year, or you can email me or Robin or ministry@united-church.ca. Does that help?
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or concerns at this point? I'd just like to say thank you all for being here with us today, online or in person. Thank you for your questions. Do keep them coming. There are resources that will be posted certainly by January, if not earlier, and ongoing communication. Are there any final questions there or any final comments? Thank you.